right, welcome everyone to day two of the Dana Foundation Career Network in Neuroscience and Society virtual career fair. We're really excited you're here. If it's your first time here, welcome. If you were here last night, welcome back. And maybe if you come all 4 nights, you'll earn frequent flyer status with the Career Network. It's my pleasure to welcome you. As I said, my name is Francis. I'm a law professor and work at the intersection of law and neuroscience and ethics, and have the pleasure of directing the Career Network. I want to get right to our main action for tonight, but I want to say a couple of introductory remarks, and in particular, some thank yous. So the first group I want to thank is the Dana Foundation. The Dana Foundation, we'll put the link in the chat, is the group that makes all of this possible. They are the sort of leader nationally and internationally in supporting efforts to bridge neuroscience and society. We couldn't do it without them. So thank you, Dana Foundation. Thanks to the team at the Career Network who put this together. Senior fellow Emily Rodriguez, you'll hear it in a second from Chinmay and Simply Neuroscience, and the rest of our amazing team, as well as everyone in my lab. Thanks to all of our partners. You can go to the neuroxcareers.org website. We'll put that link in. See all of our partners for your support. A special thank you to one partner in particular, Simply Neuroscience, who is co-hosting this event. And Chinmay, I might invite you to just say a word about this group.
Thank you. Simply Neuroscience is a student-led community that's focused on early career neuroscience outreach and education and awareness. And we invite you to check out our website to access a variety of resources, whether you're at the high school, college, or graduate school level, to get involved and learn more about how to pursue opportunities in the space. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much. So the next thing to say is that there are so many events, can't feature them all, but one I just want to flag, we'll put the link in the chat, is for those interested in the careers and funding is neuroethics, a great event coming up with our partner, International Neuroethics Society. And you can find more about those and all sorts of events, as well as a lot more on our topics tonight, neuroeconomics and neuromarketing, at the website, neuroxcareers.org. Okay, 5 quick things to know, and then I'll introduce our panelists. First, you can use the Q&A feature if you have questions, and we will have some time at the end of this first hour for questions for our panelists. So as they're going along, type in your questions, and then after all 4 have presented, we will get to as many of your questions as we can. Second thing to know, in the second hour, so East Coasters, that's it'll be 8 to 9, and here 7 to 8 Central. West Coast a little bit earlier. You can stick around for another hour where we'll get another crew of amazing experts to run breakout sessions. And those will be one-on-one. You can talk and learn more about these fields. Finally, third thing, you can come back again. We have more for you on Wednesday and Thursday nights. I just mentioned the website. That's the fourth thing. And finally, you can subscribe to our newsletter where we send out all sorts of updates for a number of different events and opportunities. All right, so let me introduce our panelists tonight. We are going to cover the topics of neuroeconomics, neuromarketing, neurobusiness. This is an area that we repeatedly hear of great interest in, and yet also a number of questions because it's unclear exactly how are these fields working together? How can you pursue this? Do you study neuroscience or economics or business or marketing or everything? And we're going to try and, I think, address a lot of that tonight. Dr. Catherine Hartley will go first, followed by Dr. Moran Cerf, Rifa Kakab, and Dr. Ming Q, all amazing. And let me start by introducing Dr. Hartley. Dr. Catherine Hartley is an associate professor of psychology at New York University. At NYU, the Hartley Lab is focused on characterizing the development and dynamics of the learning, memory, and decision processes that shape behavior. They use many different methodological techniques, including neuroimaging, psychophysiology, computational modeling, and genetics, as well as paradigms related to animal learning and economic decision theories. She holds a BS in symbolic systems from Stanford University and a PhD in psychology from NYU. Dr. Hartley, I'm going to spotlight you, and thank you for being with us, and the floor is yours. Thank you so much for being here.
Great. It's a pleasure to be here. Okay, so you got the outline of my my lab's work and my professional history in broad brushstrokes. So I'll tell you a little more about the kind of work we do. So neuroeconomics is concerned with the neuroscience of decision making. And my lab's work and the work of the field more broadly is focused on understanding the cognitive and brain systems involved in how we learn the value of things and how we make decisions. In my lab, we study this in the lab in human participants. So we use non-invasive brain imaging methods. And as was mentioned, I'm a developmental cognitive neuroscientist. So in my lab, we're concerned with understanding how age-related changes in the cognitive processes and brain circuits implicated in decision-making as individuals develop from childhood to adulthood alter the way in which they make decisions. So the kinds of questions that we're exploring in the lab are, what is it that, what changes underpin, for example, individuals' increasing willingness to defer immediate gratification in terms of longer-term rewards or goals as they get older, that enable individuals as they get older to plan further into the future. We're interested in understanding how adolescents learn through experience the values of new types of behaviors as they gain independence in the world, why sometimes adolescents may make more risky decisions in the real world, and how some aspects of adolescents' learning and decision-making may make them more vulnerable to mental illness. This has mental health implications as well. So this field is fundamentally interdisciplinary. The work that I do in my lab and that is done in the field more broadly merges approaches and theoretical foundations from multiple disciplines. So in my lab, developmental and cognitive psychology informs the design of the experimental studies that we conduct in the lab. We use neuroscience approaches. So we're using brain imaging methods to understand the neural correlates of decision-making processes and to link age-related changes in behavior to changes in the brain. We use mathematical models of learning and decision-making processes from behavioral economics and computer science. And more broadly in our work, we're often using in the design of our experiments and the analysis of our data, we're using computer programming approaches. And so many of the researchers in my lab and in the field more broadly are making extensive use of sort of computer programming training. So my own background, I have an undergraduate degree in cognitive science. As an undergraduate, I did cognitive neuroscience research for a couple years as a junior and senior. At that stage, the field of cognitive neuroscience, the study of cognition in the brain in humans was in its relatively early stages, spurred by the advent of fMRI. And I decided after I graduated to turn toward industry. And I worked for several years in AI and in quantitative finance before deciding that really my true love was neuroscience and returning to graduate school at NYU, where I pursued a PhD in cognitive neuroscience and experimental psychology. I then went on to do a postdoc where I got introduced to developmental perspectives and began to incorporate developmental approaches and questions in my research. And I've been a professor running a developmental cognitive neuroscience lab asking these questions for just over 10 years. In terms of how to get involved in neuroeconomics research, as you can see, this sort of research is highly interdisciplinary. So many trainees, whether undergraduate or applying to doctoral programs, may come from different types of backgrounds. And you can find research on the study of decision-making and the neuroscience of decision-making happening in many contexts. At NYU, this ranges from the psychology department, the neuroscience department, the economics department. Even we have a Center for Data Science, and these sorts of machine learning and data analytic approaches are also being leveraged to study many aspects of decision making in the real world. So you can search and see what kinds of research are going on at your institution, and reach out to professors who are conducting research that's of interest. Really, one thing I want to stress is that I don't think for this kind of interdisciplinary work that there are strict sorts of prerequisites or training that students are expected to have before before entering this discipline. Many vantage points are valuable in this kind of interdisciplinary work. And it's possible, this was certainly true for my own training, to gain exposure to disciplines like, for example, behavioral economics was not an area in which I had training, and all of that came to me in the process of beginning to do this sort of work. So it's possible to kind of learn as you go and continue to acquire skills. Okay, I'm going to turn it over to the next presenter, but I'm happy to take questions.
Okay, thank you so much. I think there will be a number of questions, and it's a nice transition in terms of thinking about multiple entry points for these fields and even how to define these fields. I think Dr. Cerf, you'll probably speak to this. Dr. Cerf is our next speaker, professor of neuroscience and business at Columbia University, investigating brain mechanisms behind emotion, decision-making, and consciousness, as well as using neural implants. Has a wonderful history as a white hat hacker, PhD from Caltech, MA in philosophy, and BS in physics from Tel Aviv University. Also extensive work in industry, founding Think Alike and B-Cube, and host and curator of PopTech, one of the world's leading conferences, and founder and president of the Human Single Neuron Society. One additional note that I'll make, which might be irrelevant for our space in the neuroscience and society world, is Dr. Cerf, in addition to doing all of that work, is the Alfred P. Sloan screenwriting professor, permanent position at the American Film Institute, where he teaches an annual workshop on science and films, and probably many of the films you've seen where they involve science, Dr. Cerf has had something to say about getting the science right and making it interesting. So we really are excited that you're here. Thanks for making time, and turn it over to you.
Thank you. A pleasure. So I'll follow the same steps, and I wrote one more thing that I would add, which is advice. So it's kind of concrete list of advice that I wish I was given when I started my career. So as you heard, I'm a neuroscientist by training, and I work at the business school at Columbia. I run a center that's called the Center for Advanced Technology and Human Performance, which kind of tries to merge the ideas of AI and technology with helping companies make better decisions. My career started when I studied physics, thinking I'm going to be a physicist. Then the questions that seemed most interesting to me were questions about the nature of life and kind of humanity, and it seemed that philosophy would be the way to approach them. So I transitioned to a philosophy. That's why I did the master's, and stuck with a series of questions on consciousness, which I learned would be answered in neuroscience, and then ventured into a PhD in neuroscience at Caltech, where I also shared some time. You're going to hear from him in a second. And following that, I thought I'm going to stop my academic journey and go back to industry, which is what I did before going to school, working, as you heard, in Israel in the cybersecurity world as a hacker. But I was excited by the fact that some of my academic research was turned into products. So a few of the papers I wrote were turned into products. And what's nice about that is that normally when you write papers, you kind of take an extreme case and test it on mouse and see how it works in very kind of extreme conditions. When someone tries to make it into a product, they have to make it work on Earth, metaphorically. They have to kind of deal with it can't work 95% of the time. It has to work 100% of the time. It can't kind of be theoretical. It has to be very pragmatic. So I started to see how companies implement very tiny part of my work, made me see that there's an interesting angle to take neuroscience and help companies do that. I went to NYU, where Catherine is, and spent a few years there, basically trying to transition from neuroscience to business school. I was at the business school there, and I was offered a job in a business school teaching kind of pure business. I was teaching marketing. I was teaching decision science. So really trying to do both, and ultimately landed right now in this position that allows me to do both. The main thing that I do for research, kind of that I think would be always what I feel is my kind of niche, is studying patients who undergo brain surgery. We put electrodes inside our head for clinical reasons and then study how their thinking works in very extreme situations. And it allows us to ask questions that I feel very interesting, like what happens when you dream? Can we actually access the dreams and see something about them? Or can we tell things that you don't know, but we see that your brain actually processes and kind of see the gap between what you know and what your brain knows. Things that kind of go back to my interest in philosophy years ago and finally answer them. Okay, so now to the business and neuroscience component. There's more and more companies right now that employ neuroscientists in positions of business. I would say that more than half of the students who worked with me throughout the years are now working in Silicon Valley. They were hired by companies. Some of the companies do pure neuroscience, like Neuralink by Elon Musk. Takes a lot of scientists, puts them in positions to make products. That's one type. Another type is people who study neuroscience that can just help understand people's thinking better. I have former students who work in marketing, in decision science, in gamification, all kinds of domains that effectively neuroscience touches on. Some programs are very much linked to what they did in the research. Some are not at all. But because you learn so many skills, like Catherine said earlier, in being a neuroscientist, from programming to problem solving, to designing experiments, to creating interfaces, to even kind of figuring out how attention works, there's a lot of projects for you. Okay, so the last thing I'm going to say, kind of leaving room for other questions, is what are the things that I wish I knew when I started my career that I thought would be good advice to those of you here? I assume that there are people here in various stages of their career, from undergrad to postdocs, to looking for professors and so on. So I try to kind of see what's common to all of them, and I'd say the following. I wrote quickly a bunch of them. First of all, I wrote that in almost all of my kind of journeys, when I was looking for a job, I learned that it's useful to have a story, something that you're known for. So you come to the interview, there are 10 other people who are interviewing for the same position, whether it's a professor, a postdoc, or a graduate position. It's useful to be able to have kind of a story that you can tell about yourself, people can attach themselves to. For me, for instance, the story about the single neural coding, the idea to it, that we can actually look at people's brains, was always what I was kind of known for. I didn't choose that, it kind of landed on me, but I realized that it's very easy for people to remember who I am when I give a talk about that. And I think that's good advice to have. Like, know what it is that people would remember when you leave the room, and would say, okay, we need one like that in our department. We need one like that in our PhD program. That's one. Another one that I wrote, it's useful, is to learn how to answer questions. In most of the kind of talks that you would give, or in interviews that you do, there are moments where you get asked a question, and I think it's sounds intuitive. You just answer the question, but I realize that this is a skill to have. How do you answer concisely? How do you make sure that what you answer is what people asked? How do you kind of, if you have a lot to say, how do you structure it? Like, kind of, do you say, I have 5 points and here are the 5 points? Or do you start talking and hope that people are going to let you get to all the 5? I think that practicing that is another skill that I wish kind of I knew that you can learn and become good at. I wrote that in many job talks, this is for the people who are looking for professor jobs, you show slides and people ask you questions, and I think it's trivial, but you control the slides. If there's some results that you don't feel comfortable about, you can take it out. Like, you don't have to show all your results. I would show the things that you know you can defend and explain and understand. If you have a paper and you feel that something will take you 2 hours to explain in a talk and you only have 45 minutes, just take it out. So in a way, it's like a theater and you're the actor. So you get to choose what lines you're actually going to say. And I think that's advice that I wish a lot of students work. Another one that I wrote is that it's useful in career kind of applications to have a champion. I think it used to be that you kind of have to have someone writing reference letters, but I think now every candidate has all the great references in the world. So there's something above that, which is if you have someone either in the department you're applying to, or the job you're applying to, or where you come from, someone who would call someone and say, I know that you get 100 applicants, but look at this one. This is my favorite student. It's something that's not always possible to get, but I think it was a really useful thing for me when I, at some jobs, had someone on the other side or someone on my side that basically said, I'm going to be your man or your woman in this journey and help you get there. To that extent, there's something I don't love, but I think became a really useful thing. I think I'm going to maybe do 3 more and then I'll leave it for others to add more. I watched 15, so that's so one thing that I thought is really useful these days is to actually, in some jobs that you really want to go to, actually spend time there before. It's kind of, I don't love this thing that students in a way have to kind of volunteer their time partially for free or not kind of with a lot of reward, but a lot of students do that. They basically come to my lab and they say, I want to spend the summer working for you on a small project to kind of get to know you, so you get to know me, so that when I apply in 3 months, there's some kind of footnote in the work that you know of, and you can kind of a little bit advocate for me. I think that there are some challenges with that. It's not trivial, but I think it became almost like a very kind of common thing now that students apply and say, I want to come and do things. The only reason I think it's useful to know about that is some of you, it actually would be a chance to see if you actually like what you like. You're committing to 5 years, 10 years, sometimes career. It's useful to kind of say, hey, do I really want to do that? And I'm going to end with that in a second. One more thing. Last thing I would say on the kind of normal thing is that it becomes more and more useful to have your name on a paper. Especially if you're applying for graduates. It used to be that kind of you start writing papers when you get to a PhD program or when you, now I think there's so many people who are doing that it's kind of like something that stands out. So if you're an undergrad and you're thinking of going to a PhD and you can somehow say, hey, I'm gonna work with a research team. I won't be the leader in this project, but I'm gonna be a person who helps. Maybe I'll run the study, maybe I'll collect data, maybe I'll help with the analysis and so on. And in return, you say, but I want to be part of the kind of full project. I want to see it to fruition. I want to be part of the revisions and the submission and so on. It gives you a little bit of an edge now when there's kind of application. It's true for, it wasn't the case when I started, but it became a thing. Here's my last piece of advice that I wish I'm going to end with that because this is the generic one. I think that it's useful to choose the pyramid you want to climb before you start. There's a kind of in every almost place I've worked in, once you start, it's very clear kind of how to transition. Like you start as a assistant professor and then as an associate professor and then as a full professor, and kind of before you know, you're in a 10-year trajectory to become a full professor. When I was working in industry, it's the same thing. You go to a company and you start in the metaphorically mailroom, and someone tells you if you work here for 30 years, you're going to be the CEO, and it's kind of a clear trajectory. And once you start, it becomes very, very intuitive to kind of aim to keep transitioning, but you're going to spend 30 years in this company or 10 years in this academic job and so on. I think it's useful to, before you start, ask yourself, is this the pyramid I want to climb? I was a soldier for 5 years when I was 18 to 23, and there was a clear ranking there. And I was in the process of, becoming a soldier, and only after a few years, I asked myself, hey, do I actually want to end up being the chairman of Joint Chiefs in 40 years, or do I want to do something else? And I said, no, I don't want to do that. And I changed trajectory and realized that the civilian I was after I left the army was much higher ranking than the most senior soldier in the army because I was in a trajectory that I really, really like. In that sense, I think the best advice I could give myself when I was 18 is to start first by saying, do I want to be full professor in 30 years, soldier, a CEO of a company before you start? Because once you're in, it's intuitive to kind of keep trying to go up. I'm going to pause here, and so the other questions afterwards. Thank you.
Thank you. Great advice. And questions are coming in, and we'll get to, for those just joining, use the Q&A function, add your questions, and we'll get to them after we complete all of our panelist presentations. I'm really excited that our next guest is here because in this intersection of neuroscience and society, fields like neuromarketing, neuroeconomics, they're new fields. They aren't established, and that means often you have to be entrepreneurial, and sometimes you have to start your own thing, and that's what our next speaker has done. Arifa Kakab is the founder and chief neuromarketing research scientist at the Neurobusiness Corporation, which is dedicated to democratizing neuromarketing research, making it accessible to all. She also, as an entrepreneur, is the founder and chief AI engineer at IntelliForge.ai, where she drives AI innovation for different applications in business. Business background, holds a global executive MBA in business analytics from Holt International Business School and another Master's of Science in Applied Artificial Intelligence from the Shiley Marco School of Engineering. I'm really excited to have you here. Neuroscience, AI, marketing. I know our students are excited to hear from you. Thanks for being here. Floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Francis. It is a pleasure being here, and I appreciate this opportunity. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. I prepared a few slides for all of you today, if that's okay.
Great.
Let me go ahead and share my screen. Okay. Can you guys see?
They look great. Thank you.
Okay, super. Okay, guys, so today I'm going to be talking about neuromarketing, which I like to call the science of why. My name is Arifa Koka. Right, so let's start off with about who I am. So I am the Chief AI Engineer and the Chief Neuromarketing Research Scientist at both of my companies, which are the Neurobusiness Corporation, and I recently launched IntelliForge.ai. And I am on the autism spectrum, and I'm also ADHD, which means I'm very neurospicy. I started off as a model and promoter in retail events in Dubai back in 2006, and I worked for a lot of the Fortune 500 companies of consumer goods for beauty products, and that were being launched in Dubai in the Middle East. And that's where I got a lot of interaction with consumers. And I would see like some events would work, some events would not work as much. And so I had that face-to-face interaction. Ultimately, by the time I was 21, I was heading 6 countries in the Middle East. It was 2012 by that time for the Estee Lauder companies for the luxury brand that we all love, La Mer. I graduated with an executive MBA in August of 2020. The same year, I launched the Neurobusiness Corporation. I did study neuromarketing and business analytics. Business analytics was my specialization. And this is where I was exposed to AI for the first time, as well as neuromarketing. My first neuromarketing research project was in the same year, 2020, with the company Givenchy in the Middle East, under the LVMH group, and I helped to redefine their luxury consumer experience. And I'll tell you more about that on the next slide. And I am still in the process of pursuing my Master's of Science Engineering and Applied AI. I've already developed my own proprietary software for the company, the Neurobusiness Corporation. And this software basically analyzes the psychophysiological responses, thus democratizing neuromarketing research. And I'll let you guys know what that means in just a bit. Okay, so neuromarketing is an interdisciplinary field which combines marketing, psychology, and neuroscience. It basically helps us to understand the brain, and why they make a certain decision, the science behind behavior, advertising, what are the instincts that makes a consumer purchase a certain brand over another brand. And we take all of this insight and then we create stronger marketing strategies. But that's the main purpose of neuromarketing in a nutshell, basically. So why neuromarketing? Basically, it connects your brain with emotions and allows these insights to be used in marketing. Now, did you guys know 95% of consumer purchasing decisions are actually emotional? And for luxury consumers, it's more impulsive, emotional, impulsive sort of decision-making processes. So neuromarketing allows us to understand consumer behavior to the core. Basically, we see whether the participant of a neuromarketing research is either feeling upset, angry, happy, sad, scared, tired, surprised, or a certain way, depending on, what they're looking at, what sort of marketing stimuli that they're looking at. It can be even like a product. It can be an advertisement that they're looking at. It can be a trailer of a new movie. It can be anything that invokes some sort of a response, inside the participant. So again, neuromarketing allows us to understand consumer behavior to the core emotionally. Okay, So here's neuromarketing in action, folks. This is during the Givenchy neuromarketing research project that we had done that I had executed back in 2020, my first one. And as you can see on her head, she has something called the EEG device. Now, the EEG device is basically a very non-invasive way of measuring the electrical activity in the brain. And there's a software that was allowing me to get all of this brain data and be able to basically analyze, how she's feeling in terms of emotionally while she's being asked different questions or she was being shown the latest ad campaign of Givenchy at that time. They had launched a new skincare line. But yeah, this is a little bit of what it looks like. The ones that I execute now are a little bit more advanced. I do use the eye tracking device, and I'll go through those devices in just a bit, actually. So here is basically a breakdown of all of the different things that are measured during a neuromarketing research project and the different devices that are used to measure these things. So the first thing is basically the EEG device that measures the brain activity, the electrical brain activity, because our brains give off a certain waves, and different waves allow us to identify what emotions they're feeling. Are they engaged? Are they bored? Are they really interested in what you're speaking about? And then there's also eye tracking. So there's something called like eye tracking devices. I use two. So there's either the mobile eye tracking device, which is basically something that can be used in a mobile sort of an environment, like on the shop floor, or there is a screen-based, which is more like a stick. And what it does is it measures the gaze and the pupil dilation, because the larger the pupil is, the more engaged the participant is. And the smaller the pupil is, the more they're not really engaging with what they're looking at. Then there's facial expression analysis, and this is done with using a camera that has an inbuilt AI model. Using computer vision and AI, it's a hybrid, so sort of a software, and it allows for the software to identify facial expression, so facial expression analysis. And then there's two more things that we look at. We look at the ECG. The ECG device allows us to measure the heartbeat. So you can imagine, maybe the participant is watching sort of like an advertisement that they are really connecting with, and the heartbeat is really fast. So each sort of measurement that is taken has a huge impact on the final report. And then last but not least, electrodermal activity. So this is basically a device that goes on the finger, which measures the electrical activity on the skin for emotional arousal. And moving forward, here are my words of advice, guys. So if you're interested in neuromarketing, here's what I would suggest. Definitely study business, marketing, consumer psychology, cognitive neuroscience, and behavioral economics. If you can get a subject, in one of your degrees and in one of these, it will really help develop that foundation. Understand the main marketing concepts like branding, customer segmentation, digital marketing, just to name a few. Learn biometric and neurometric tools, like you can do certifications to really understand them. For sure, stay updated in AI and data analytics. Network. That is so important. And then do real world projects. Something that the previous professor that just mentioned, internships, research assistants, or collaborations with other neuromarketing agencies, just so you can get a real feel of what basically neuromarketing is, and if this is truly a field that you really want to pursue. Those would be my words of advice. And then I'd like to end my session. Thank you so much for all of your attention. I have kept a QR code there as well if you want to scan it. And then feel free to add me on LinkedIn. Thank you so much, guys. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much. Wonderful presentation. We are through three, and it's my pleasure to introduce now our fourth and final panelist. I remind everyone You can submit your questions, and then we'll get to them after Dr. Xu. Dr. Ming Xu is the William Halford Jr. Family Chair in Marketing and Associate Professor of Business Administration at the University of California, Berkeley. So we're making sure we got New York and California. We got both coasts here. Dr. Xu's research involves using neuroscientific and computational tools to understand the biological basis of economic and consumer decision making, as well as how brain-based methods can be used to generate and validate insights into customers' thoughts, feelings, and behavior. And I know many of you are interested in that. What is going on inside the head when we buy and shop? Dr. Xu is economist, PhD in economics from Caltech, BA in political science from University of Arizona. And I'm sure we're going to hear in part how an economist came to neuroscience along the way in your journey. Thanks so much for being here.
Great. Thanks for having me. It's nice to see familiar faces and new faces as well. So I'll try to keep this short since I'm sure you want to get to the Q&A sessions and make it more personal and relevant for yourselves. So to Francis' earlier point, how did a economist get into neuroeconomics and into a marketing department? So, I mean, this also, I think, is a good place to start with probably the main advice I would give as a junior researcher or just as someone starting your career, which is to kind of think about your comparative advantage as a student and as a researcher. So I started in at Arizona when I was I think a sophomore or junior or something like that, and I was working in a neuroscience lab at that time actually, and I got involved in this when there was a research symposium. This is when kind of people were starting to use fMRI for lots of cognitive and behavioral questions. And there was a research symposium, and there was a group that was presenting, and they very clearly were not neuroscientists because they kind of didn't know what they were doing. So they were presenting things, and it turned out to be one of the foundational papers in neuroeconomics. So it was an fMRI study on the trust game. So how people develop trust, what brain regions and and this is before we kind of knew anything about how the brain made decisions in humans especially, and never mind kind of trust and these kind of very high order or complex kind of decisions. And it was a fMRI study, and this group kind of and I just remember thinking like they had some of the most interesting questions, but they just it's very clear that they were very new at all of this. So at the intermission, I kind of talked to one of them, and it turns out that they were faculty in the economics department, and they were interested in this, and this was their first study. They the PI, whose name I'll tell you in a second, was interested in this, and there was like a whole group of economists in the lab, and this was the first neuro imaging study done kind of by economists. And it's not surprising that they didn't know what they were doing. And when I just talked to them at the end of the conversation, they said like, "Oh, do you want to? You sound like you sound like you kind of know what you're doing. Do you want to help us out?" And I was like, "Oh yeah, this sounds really interesting." And it turned out that a couple of years later, the PI of the lab, who's Vernon Smith, then won the Nobel Prize in economics in 2001. So, and at the time, I had absolutely no idea, right? So, but it was, it's one of those areas where Vernon Smith clearly knew a lot more than me and knows a lot more than me about lots of areas of economics. But that didn't matter to him because he wanted to answer questions that as an economist didn't really have any training in doing. And someone like me who was an undergrad who didn't know very much was actually more knowledgeable at this than he is. Right. So as opposed to like me applying and doing all this and saying like, oh, could you give me an internship, et cetera, et cetera. If you have kind of the right skill set, people are very open to having you help. And that's because you kind of have a comparative advantage in these particular areas. And same thing in graduate school. So I applied broadly to graduate school in economics. This was at the time when economics departments had absolutely no idea what economics and psychology were, kind of much further away than they are now. I mean, Kahneman Tversky was kind of known, respected, but it's definitely not nearly as well integrated as it is now. Incidentally, Kahneman Tversky died has already passed away at that point, but Kahneman won the Nobel Prize the same year as Vernon Smith. So it's so these are kind of areas where, even behavioral economics is sort of like got its validation fairly late, like 10, 20 years after people start working on these kind of questions. And I applied broadly, and it was Caltech and Colin Kammer, who is, I think Colin Kammer is kind of, I still think back, he kind of he has a very good nose for these sort of things. When he interviewed me, I still remember him saying like, nobody knows what neuroeconomics is, but I think in 5 years, it'll be a thing, right? And then 5 years is basically when I graduated, and it did become kind of a thing, and it was kind of amazing, right? Like there was like at the time, like absolutely no one was talking about it, and there was just like one lab that was doing it. Sure, Nobel Prize winner, but Nobel Prize winners have a lot of crazy ideas that don't pan out, right? So, I go to Caltech. We start working on this, and at that time I didn't have I didn't know anything about marketing. I was my first job was at University of Illinois, in the middle of, like literally in the middle of the cornfields. Um, uh, um, and one day, Berkeley called me up and said like, "Oh, do you want to move to Berkeley?" I'm like, "Oh yeah, that sounds interesting. Like, but you have to teach marketing." Like, I don't know anything about marketing. And they're like, "That's fine. You can learn along with the students." I'm like, okay. So, but it's another one of those cases where, I didn't know marketing. I didn't know the first thing about marketing, but I didn't know enough about economics, enough about the things that marketers cared about, that I could bring in new perspectives and people kind of appreciate it, right? Marketing is, marketing is also one of those fields that's very accessible. So you can't be a lawyer if you didn't go to law school, as Francis knows. But there are most marketers did not have a PhD or an MBA in marketing, right? So this is an area where, it's not like being a doctor or a lawyer. There's a lot of kind of different skill sets that are involved, and people can thrive without having kind of formal degree in that. So, which I think actually helped in terms of me being able to get into the field. And since then, one of the, I think, the really interesting things in terms of the type of research that we do is, it really allows us to, being in a business school really allows us to kind of ask questions that I think are pretty commonsensical, but which people end up not, for one reason or another, because of disciplinary boundaries and etc., haven't really asked. So neuroeconomics was kind of one of them. It's like, we know a lot about psychology, we know a lot about decision making in economics and also in psychology. And we also know a lot about the brain, but how does the brain allow us to make economic decisions? At least in 2001, somehow nobody has asked that question, at least in humans. People have done this in rodents, but in humans, it sort of almost seems like decision making is sort of like kind of too, that's what, like, reward, that's like what animals do. Like for humans, like, we're all about like cognition and like, mental theory of mind, and like, figuring out intentions of others, etc. Right? It's kind of, in thinking back, it's like it's such an obvious question. And I think that's another area which, as you're starting out, those disciplinary boundaries probably mean much less to you than it certainly does to people like us. And hopefully what you can do is kind of see like these things are the way things are right now is because, not because of any rational reason, it's that because nobody has thought of it in those directions. And I actually had a vivid example of just how much we're all brainwashed in graduate school a few years ago. And I use brainwash. I mean, it's as you learn stuff, it's not even a negative thing. You learn things, and you kind of, it makes you blind to certain things, certain other things. So in graduate school, if you go to economics, you'll have like the first year, you'll probably have every single course you're going to have is going to start out with some version of, if you have decision making, assume that there are preferences, assume that they're well ordered and are transitive, etc. And here's how you can test it, and etc. And then blah blah blah, lots of interesting things happen. You can do interesting math with it. You can calculate different types of equilibrium. You can sort of back out lots of interesting implications. But if you ask, like, where do your preferences come from? Where do options come from? Right? Those are all completely taken as given. In fact, if you go back to one of the foundational decision theory books, it literally says decision analysis deals with how people evaluate the basically cost and benefits of different options. And as to what options they are, they're outside of the scope of decision analysis, right? And I think nobody I know has thought twice about this. It's like once you open up the black box of where do options come from, it sort of no longer becomes economics. And that's just taken almost as gospel. But once you think about it, it seems kind of weird. Like, it's if I make decisions, the first thing we think about is like, oh, what your options are, right? If you don't say, like, if you want to search for a job, assume that there are job offers. Like, that's kind of like, that's the whole point, to get job offers and to figure out what you want. And those are all things that as economists, like, for in the 1920s, yeah, those assumptions made sense. And if you didn't make those assumptions, you would never have developed the intellectual scaffolding. But then it all kind of, solidifies into sort of a very kind of a consolidated and sort of gospel in terms of what they are, or what the foundational assumptions are. And people sort of think that questioning that becomes sort of taboo. And as someone starting out, I think those are probably things that you will have much better chance of noticing than people like us. And then those are also exactly the type of things that you would have the best opportunity to contribute to. And if anything, like, that's sort of, I think you almost have an obligation to contribute on those, because those are the areas where you bring value to the whole enterprise. Those are also the type of things that at least we try quite a bit to bring to the field. So, for example,
Dr. Xu, I'm going to interrupt for a second. We've got 12 minutes and a lot of questions. I'm wondering
oh
if
yeah, yep. I said
can.
I keep this short, so I will definitely keep to my promise. And let me actually just stop here and let you
Okay, great. We'll bring everyone on. I'm going to bring all of our panelists spotlight. And thanks to those and Dr. Hartley who've been answering questions in the Q&A. I want to sort of take a question that I think is sort of bubbling underneath some of the ones that have been asked. And that is, in making the case as an individual candidate that a neuroscience background is relevant to business and marketing. We're outside of the clinical space now. We're in business and marketing. It begs the bigger question that each of you must have wrestled with, that we deal a lot with in law and neuroscience, which is, why isn't it enough just to have really good behavioral data and behavioral theories? Why do you need to go beneath the skull, single neurons, fMRI, EEG? What have you told your colleagues in mainstream economics and marketing? What is the value added that you found of adding the neuroscience to good behavioral data? Maybe we can just kind of circle back, Dr. Hartley, Dr. Cerf, and go on from there.
Sure. You know, you need to consider the brain if you want to ask questions about how a given process is implemented biologically. If you answer the question at that level, this opens up new opportunities. There may be opportunities to ameliorate decision-making difficulties in neurodegenerative disorders. There may be opportunities, for example, to use neural data to make predictions about how individuals will make choices in consumer decision-making contexts, as we heard before. But you can get very far with behavior at describing the process that well captures the choices that people make. But behavior can't readily speak to this level about how that process arises, how biological systems like humans or animals produce these kinds of behavioral patterns. And I really think if your question is about how, or if you want to apply knowledge about how the system works translationally, you really need to turn to neuroscience. You need to incorporate a neuroscientific perspective.
Anybody else want to add anything on?
Well, quickly, I mean, here's a simple one. For instance, take marketing. Sometimes people don't give you the answer you want. You ask a question about healthcare, people are embarrassed by the answer, and they just won't tell you. They would lie, or they would tell you incomplete things. Neuroscience is the way to get a more objective, accurate answer. That's one thing. Sometimes you ask in a survey a question like, how much do you like this movie? And a person in their mind says, I don't know, maybe it was a 7 or a 9, I'm not sure. I guess I'm gonna put an 8. Another guy just think it's an 8. For you, 8 looks like an 8. You don't know if it was like, I don't know if it's 7 or 9 or if it's really an 8. Neuroscience will tell you this was kind of ambivalent, this was correct. Sometimes people really don't know. You ask them a questions and they don't know in their mind. Like, yes, why did you choose this thing? And they start to narrate their thoughts, but they don't know the answer. Neuroscience gets you almost everything. The root is in the brain. If you can get to the root, you get the correct answer.
Let me ask an additional question that's here. There are several questions about training. All 4 of you have a variety of technical skills that take time to develop, and you've developed them in different ways. Could you, the specific question is sort of how would you recommend getting such interdisciplinary experience as an undergrad? Maybe you could each touch on that, and in particular, maybe Arif, we can start with you, because I think a related question is how much training exposure to artificial intelligence is needed. You're right in the heart of it. So maybe we'll just go around with thoughts on sort of how you get the technical skills needed in these really high-end disciplines.
Yes, of course. First of all, they're all really good questions. I do want to start off with every neuromarketing firm is different. AI itself, in the terms of AI programming, is not a very necessary technical skill that is required to execute neuromarketing. That is something that I took on myself. And the reason why I did that is because neuromarketing softwares are extremely expensive. And that's what bumps up the price for the end user, and thus it's not available for everyone to really all companies to be able to afford, you can say. So that's something that I took upon myself to go ahead and do another, to gain that extra skill in AI programming, so I can then develop my own software and then thus be able to democratize neuromarketing research and make it more affordable for like all companies to use. To push that frontier in the neuromarketing industry. However, having said that, to know AI programming is not a prerequisite for neuromarketing in general. Every company will have their own software, their own set of rules that they're going to be following. I think for me, the most important things that you want to learn, be it through certificates, I feel like certificates and short courses are really, really helpful. Even if you don't want to go ahead and do your bachelor's or your master's or your PhD in it, I think, a combination of different certificates, that's what I look out for personally when I'm hiring someone. I feel like these sort of certificates allow the hiring person to see, right, so does this person have all the fundamental concepts of neuromarketing, which is things in basically consumer psychology, biometric tools, neurometric tools, and stuff like that, but not AI in particular.
Other thoughts. We actually have the last 2 questions are also about some what hard skills are needed, what set of skills in neuroeconomics industry. And I would say also, what sorts of skills do you look for in your graduate programs or in your labs when you're hiring?
I can add a little bit to that. So mean, I'm gonna actually zoom out and kind of answer this a little bit more in a meta way. So I think one thing that we try to look for is really depth over breadth. So, and I think this kind of relates to some of the real kind of pressures that students are facing these days, which is there are so many opportunities, so many things to learn, and students are very excited, and they end up kind of learning a little bit about each area. So they kind of on the surface sound very knowledgeable about each of these, and when you dig a little bit deeper, you're kind of disappointed because they didn't have time to learn any one particular area very much. And I think that really hurts you in the long run because you sort of don't develop a depth of sort of skill that can really allow you, that's really necessary in the scientific research that you need to to really contribute, right? Like it's okay to learn a little bit about lots of things, but if you have no kind of core skill set, that's I think actually something that really hurts students. But I think it really is that there's just so much kind of fear of missing out and so many opportunities that are out there. And I think it really takes a lot of effort to kind of fight that and try to, you have to you suffer an opportunity cost in terms of missing out on certain things. But I think it really is necessary because otherwise you can't it's really difficult to thrive in graduate school or as a researcher if you kind of don't have that depth and well of expertise to draw upon.
Dr. Hartley, I saw you nodding. Do you want to
Yeah,
add on this one?
I want to sort of give a counterpoint to the what Ming was saying. As someone who has really broad interests, and I appreciate like the resources that the internet provides now to sort of learn a little more about this or that, and to sort of effectively dabble. But his point about depth. I mean, I think that you cultivate this kind of depth and expertise in the process of focusing for an extended period of time on a program of research. When I think about the sort of methodological or quantitative domains in which I have the greatest depth, it's sort of when I would revisit the same types of problems or analyses repeatedly and become more sophisticated in my knowledge. And usually this just comes in the process of working on a certain type of problem. And so I wouldn't stress too much about thinking like, what is it that I need to know and learn in advance of pursuing this specialized trajectory, because really you're going to, if you train your focus on a given question or area of study, you're going to begin to cultivate methodological depth in how to ask that kind of, if you maintain a focus there, how to ask that kind of question effectively. And so I think the notion of how do I prepare in advance, part of the process may be to do some of that exploration to identify like what are the questions that are really exciting to me, but then to continue to train your focus on those questions for long enough to really get deep. But I think advanced preparation, especially in the early stages of one's career, isn't as important as continuing to kind of dig down.
We are just about out of time, and I'm going to hold us to time because we've got a second hour with great breakout rooms and another group of amazing people coming in. But I want to give each of our panelists, first of all, I want to say thank you to all of you. This has been tremendous and exactly the sort of advice that I know people here are wanting to hear. Just a last word, if there are any sort of resources you'd recommend, places to go to learn more. We've linked to all of your own labs. Anything else that you'd like to say in conclusion, and maybe we'll go in reverse order. So that would be Dr. Shu first, and then Arifa, and then Dr. Cerf, and then Dr. Hartley.
Yeah, so I mean, I think these days the opportunities are much broadly accessible. So you can reach out. There's so much information online, and there's and lots of the researchers and lots of research can also be done remotely. So so for example, I would encourage you to kind of find different labs that you're interested in. Find the research questions, read their papers, and really kind of devote yourself to learning more about the questions that they're studying, and kind of think about like what your contributions are. Like as a researcher, if you're going to go into the PhD program, you'll need to be more than just a consumer of research, which I think as undergrads, there's kind of a tendency to think of yourself as like learning, as absorbing the knowledge. right? Which is, of course, kind of the necessary component. But as a PhD student or as a researcher, you also have to use that knowledge and produce. So if you kind of see, and if you can kind of see like through that experience, like, oh, these are the questions that I think I can contribute to, then you have a much stronger case when you reach out, when you do cold emails or when you introduce yourself. It's in a way that is, I think, demonstrates that you understand their needs, and you have value to contribute, as opposed to, okay, I'm here to learn, then it's kind of up to us to teach you stuff, right? Which is in PhD and in graduate school, it's a two-way street, right? Like you're learning from us, we're contributing to your education, but also because we're investing in you, we're not just like giving you knowledge for the sake of it, right? Like there's kind of a selfish aspect of that as well.
Great, thank you. Tarifa, any last words?
Yes, very quickly, just 1 minute. The growth of neuromarketing is only going to skyrocket, and one of the main reasons is that by the end of this year, the use of third-party cookies is completely diminishing, which means that companies are going to be forced to understand their consumer behavior to the core. So this is the best time to jump into neuromarketing because it's only going to go explosively up in the next few years. That's it. Thank you so much. I appreciate all your time.
Thank you for being here. Dr. Sir.
3 sentences. One, you have one tool that we didn't have when we started, which is AI. A lot of the questions can be used. This is really a good tool for learning. I think you should use it. Two, I said that it's useful to have a champion. You have now 5 people who are in this panel. Don't hesitate to reach out to us when you kind of want to ask specific questions. This is supposed to be intimate, and in that sense, feel free. And 3, the question that I saw coming and was asked by Francis before, what's the skill that is really useful? One that I think is useful that I would highly recommend is learn to write an essay. It sounds trivial. Everyone kind of thinks that they know how to do it, but that's the number one thing that in every domain, every profession I had, I learned that is really useful. Learn how to write well in English.
Agreed. Dr. Hartley.
I guess one final thought that hasn't been touched upon, although I completely endorse the writing as one of the most important generalizable skills across many of the career paths that you might pursue, something to always work on. I would encourage you all to not be in too much of a hurry to try and identify a career path. When you're young, you have time to sort of explore and feel things out before you have to, a PhD program is a very long time. Certainly get experience in doing research before you commit to doing that. If there are other trajectories that you think might be exciting to you, a good time to explore is, internships as an undergraduate or after you graduate, explore industry positions or academic research positions. Take time to feel out potential trajectories before you plan to commit yourself to a path. There are many ways of translating an interest in neuroscience into careers, as you've heard, and don't rush into them. Explore and see what really resonates with you.
Great advice from everyone. Thank you so much, all 4 of our panelists, for being here. I'm sorry we couldn't get to all the questions, but there are opportunities to explore those and other questions with our breakout room leaders. So I'm now going to sort of do a transition here, but thank you so much to our panelists. So we have a special opportunity in the second hour. We've got another 55 minutes here. We've got an amazing group of now breakout room leaders, and I'm going to bring them all on, introduce them, and then what will happen is we will go into the breakout rooms. You'll be able to go to any breakout room you want and kind of bounce around even for the next hour. So let me get a couple more added here. And I think my co-host can help me add. In 1 second. Chinmay and Emily, are you able to help me do the spotlights? as I get going down the list. Okay. Let me add, what else are we missing? Emily and Jimmy, we've got everyone, or there we go. Thank you. Okay. All right. So thank you to our breakout room leaders. This is the first time I get to say hi to you, and thank you. You're coming in midstream. We just had a great hour with our panelists. There are a lot of students here who are really eager to speak with you. So as I mentioned, the interface is really wide open. In a second, I will open up the breakout rooms. But before we do, just a chance for us to introduce you. And then if there's anything you just want to say about the things you might cover in your breakout room, or anything else you want to say, please do. So let me introduce all of you, and let's start with Thomas Henning. Thomas, thank you for being here. Thomas is a graduate student in social and decision neuroscience at Caltech, where he focuses on neuroforecasting. That's using brain data to predict behavior, especially population behavior, and studying human interaction with AI. He is also the co-president of the Black Scientists and Engineers of Caltech and holds a finance degree from Arizona State and experience as a structured credit trader at Goldman Sachs. And his work is focusing on the neural basis of economic decision-making under risk and ambiguity, and using that to inform policy. Thomas, welcome. Anything you want to say to our participants here?
No, that's a great introduction. I'm really excited to kind of get to meet some of you and answer some of your questions.
Cool. Thanks so much for being here. Next, Naveen Rao is a writer and market analyst who's been covering healthcare for the last 16 years. He founded Patchwise Labs. They're a creative strategy firm dedicated to supporting innovation at the frontiers of human health and well-being. Also, the editor-in-chief of Neurotech Futures, which is an awesome place, a publication exploring humanity's inner frontiers through the lens of neurotech. And so he's got a real sense of where the field and the markets are across markets, commercial activity, regulatory developments, community events, and more. That's also a great place, everyone. If you haven't found it, Neurotech Futures, you should go. Holds a BS in cellular and molecular biology, writing seminars, as well as an MHS in mental health and hygiene, health, finance, and management from Johns Hopkins University. Naveen, thanks so much for being here. What a cool background. And anything you want to say to our group before we...
I would just say I missed the last hour. I'm regretting it already. I would just say if you're in this room, you're taking time out of your schedule to participate in an event like this, that's a great sign. And I'm just so excited to get to know a few of you. And thank you so much.
Cool. And hey, thanks for Neurotech Futures. So it's great for our community. Okay, next is somebody I know really well. Ivan Ramirez is a member of our Shen Neurolaw Lab and a member of the Career Network in Neuroscience and Society. He is now a master's student studying cognitive science at Johns Hopkins University, and an RA in our lab, and an RA at the Johns Hopkins School of Medicine. He received his bachelor's degree from the University of Oklahoma, where he studied psychology and neuroscience, and also did a research internship with the FAA Civil Aerospace Medical Institute. He has interests at the intersection of law and neuroscience, and you might ask him how he found his way to our lab from Oklahoma, which took a lot of initiative, and we're really happy. Ivan, anything you want to say about your breakout room? Oh, you're muted, Ivan.
Yes, I guess given my interests are primarily lie with neuroscience law is probably what I'll be covering. So, but other than that, I have nothing else to say. That was a good introduction.
Great. Thanks for being here. Our final breakout room will actually be a combination of two colleagues. Dr. Rajneesh Suri is the Senior Vice Provost for Academic Industry Partnerships at Drexel University, something we didn't talk as much about in the first hour, but so important, the combination of academia and industry together. He was previously the Vice Dean for Research and Strategic Partnerships and a Professor of Marketing at LaBelle College of Business at Drexel U, and studies consumer experiences, effects of price and other marketing communications on consumer decision-making, and relevant to this career network. In addition to traditional behavioral methods, he uses neuroimaging, including FNIRS and EEG and other physiological tools. Has a Bachelor of Mechanical Engineering from the University of Delhi, an MBA from the Indian Institute of Management in Calcutta, and a PhD in Marketing from the University of Illinois at Urbana Champaign. The second time we've heard about our Big Ten colleagues, University of Illinois tonight. I'll introduce Dr. Ayaz as well. Dr. Hassan Ayaz is a Provost Solutions Fellow and Associate Professor at Drexel University School of Biomedical Engineering, Science, and Health Systems. He directs the Neuroergonomics and Neuroengineering for Brain Health and Performance Research Core. And thanks to Dr. Ayaz, we will at next year's career fair and in our website be featuring more of neuroergonomics, which I only learned about today, in fact, or the last week. His research interests include understanding human brain functioning using mobile neuroimaging in realistic and real-world environments across the lifespan, from healthy to clinical conditions, in collaboration with many partners and clinical and domain experts. His background: BS in electrical and electronic engineering from Boğaziçi University, and an MS and PhD in biomedical engineering from Drexel as well. Thanks to both of you for being here. Anything the two of you want to say about your breakout room, other than the fact that you've got like 8 decades of combined experience of everything imaginable? But yeah, I don't know anything else.
I would defer it to Hassan, but thank you very much for this opportunity. And I think it'll be good to get the questions from the students to see what they're looking, or future students or current students to see what they're thinking about. And we can relate some of our experiences in the past few years. So Hassan, go ahead.
Yeah, same here. Thank you for the opportunity, and look forward to talking with the students and learn about their interests.
Great. Well, I am going to open all rooms, and I'll stay in the main room to talk about anything anybody wants, or just to hang out. Neuroscience and Law, Neuroscience and Society, our career network, anything you want. Let me open all the rooms, and then you can find your way to your rooms. If you have any trouble getting to one, I'll stick around and I'll get you there too. Thank you again to our breakout room leaders. Now, I think we have one, so I'm going to end at 8:30. That is going to be, remind me who's leaving at 8:30. Okay, yeah, Darshini. Okay, great. So we'll close that one at 8:30. All the rest will be at 8:30 Eastern time. All the rest will be up until. Oh yes, go ahead.
Sorry, Francis. I'm also happy to introduce myself because I think you may have.
Oh yeah, sorry. I somehow completely did not do that. Let me do that. Dr. Darshini Mahadevia is an engagement manager at McKinsey and Company, and where she intertwines experience in brain and public health with public sector engagement via the McKinsey Health Institute. We're really happy you're here because there's been a lot of interest in the consulting side, and so I think you're going to have a lot of folks. So go to Dr. Darshini first. Holds a PhD in cellular and molecular biology and neuroscience from Columbia University, and BA in psychology from Colby College. So you'll be here till the half hour, which is still plenty of time.
Yeah, and I'm happy to stay on a little bit longer.
Okay.
Yeah.
Great. Well, thank you.
Probably like 8:35 or 8:40.
Okay.
But
Well, that's great.
Chatting with folks.
20 minutes. Yeah. So bounce around, everyone. I'll stay here. Let me open it up. Find your rooms, and thank you for being here.